HGI Now, turning supply chain insights into action.
Welcome to HGI Now. I'm Edward Hertzman, founder of Hertzman Global Intelligence. Today we're discussing the latest governmental developments you may have missed among the tariff noise with Ron Sorini, principal and co-founder of international trade firm Sorini, Samet, and Advisors, which consults with companies and trade associations on a range of topics related to international trade. So, Ron, tariffs have been dominating the conversation lately, but there's a lot going on in Washington. Beyond the trade war, there's been a move to eliminate first sale. Can you explain what this is and give you a perspective on whether first sale is a net good or net bad for the industry?
So first sale's been around for a long time. And you may recall that the Obama administration made a pretty significant effort to try to eliminate first sale. They ran into a political buzzsaw, and it was a bipartisan buzzsaw. Democrats and Republicans resoundingly opposed the elimination of first sale. I'm candidly not hearing much talk about it. There was legislation introduced by two senators, Senator Cassidy of Louisiana, Senator Whitehouse on the Democratic side. Last time I checked, which was a few days ago, there's no co-sponsors. Now, Peter Navarro at the White House immediately said, this is a good thing, we support this. But yet, I don't sense any appetite to repeal first sale, at least legislatively. What could eventually happen is what happened on de minimis. You remember de minimis, when people started complaining about de minimis, like the National Council of Textile Organizations, the big guys like Amazon, UPS said, that's noise. It will never go away. The politics changed on de minimis really quickly. I'm not predicting they will on first sale, but that could potentially happen. I think more likely, though, is you're going to see more scrutiny by CBP on first sale transactions to dive deeper into, is the correct value being claimed. One thing that's being used to argue against first sale is the United States, I believe, is now the only country that allows first sale. There were more in the past, and other countries have changed their law. But again, there's been so much disruption on trade and on tariffs, I don't think Congress has the appetite for more disruption. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that first sale's in jeopardy in the near term. I don't think before the elections. I don't think before the end of the year. And I don't think probably next year. What we'll all have to watch is, does the politics of that change? And like de minimis, does there become a groundswell to say, hey, wait a minute, we got to get rid of this?
First sale isn't the only topic making news these days. We've also seen an attempt to change the rules related to importers of record.
Correct.
Why is this happening? And is the proposed SAFE Act the best way to address trade fraud?
So there's been increase. And by the way, again, on the legislation introduced to repeal first sale, what Senator Cassidy's office tells us, is that was really in a reaction from CBP saying that there's a lot of abuse out there. And so therefore something needs to be done. Either we need more resources to be able to deal with that, to enforce the law and first sale, because first sale is a perfectly legal transaction. We're seeing more and more scrutiny on non-resident importers. And CBP, again, is telling folks that's where you find abuse. So you have a non-resident importer import something, and then they disappear. And so you can't go after them if you find that they did not declare their imports right, and then they set up shop under a different name. I do think that is something that will be dealt with by Congress when they eventually get to trade. I don't sense Congress will vote on any trade matter before the midterm elections, but if passed as prologue, quite often Congress deals with trade in a lame duck session of Congress. So that would be a session of Congress that takes place after the elections, while the current Congress is still in power, before the new Congress takes office in early January. So that's the time period where I could see several trade issues being dealt with.
But Ron, on this topic, even if you use a foreign broker and they bring the goods into the States, DDP, they under-invoice the goods, they run away, the importer of record, the wholesaler or retailer that utilizing that foreign broker, they're still liable. Maybe they're not liable for the the tariffs per se, but they could be financially and legally, and they could be tried in court. They could go to jail. They could be imposed fines. Why is this not more talked about?
Well, that's a good point, Edward. I mean, I think, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't want to pretend I'm a lawyer giving legal advice. But yes, the ultimate buyer of a product can be liable, even if they're not the importer of record, if CBP and the Justice Department can determine that they had knowledge and help orchestrate the fraud. So that does happen. And in fact, there was a flurry of activity, I would say 3 to 6 months ago, in a 2 to 3 month period, where we were getting numerous calls every day saying, hey, we're being approached by our suppliers to go to DDP. What does that mean? Should we do that? And I'd say probably, 80% of the people rejected going to DDP because they felt the risk would outweigh the reward, that there would be a tremendous scrutiny by CBP. And sometimes the pricing they would get from their overseas suppliers was too good to be true. So, but some did move to DDP, and if they do it right, it's again it's a legal concept. But we're going to see more of those transactions scrutinized by CBP. I do think that's going to be a big issue. Will CBP get a bigger budget? And my guess is they will.
My guess is they will, and I think we're going to see a lot more brands called out for this. But I'm glad to hear some people are taking the moral high ground here and realizing that it is too good to be true. All right, last question. USMCA is set for review. Do you have any insights into what each party is hoping to get out of these talks, and what are some of the amendments you personally would like to see?
Well, when you say each party, I would say Canada and Mexico, as two of the parties, would just like to get out of it without any change, right? They believe they like the original NAFTA, which I had the honor of being one of the negotiators for. Then when they reconfigured it and went to USMCA, where you saw changes, particularly in the auto sector, nothing in apparel, textiles, or travel goods or footwear, I think they become pretty content with the agreement as is. So clearly Mexico and Canada's strategy is going to be to achieve the least amount of change as possible. On the administration side, I think there's been a bit of a rude awakening that there's only so much they can do without getting congressional approval. So under the first Trump administration, when they went from NAFTA to USMCA, they had a bipartisan working group on NAFTA/USMCA. It hadn't been named yet when they started the working group. It was bipartisan, and it was clear the administration could get changes and get congressional approval. There's something called the implementing legislation that when the administration negotiates a trade agreement, they then need to go to Congress to get the authority to implement that agreement. There are certain things the administration could do in USMCA without going back to Congress, but anything significant, they will probably need to go back to Congress. I think the number one issue for the administration is, and this goes back to what Ross Perot was saying when we negotiated NAFTA, which is we can't have Canada and Mexico be the backdoor to the U.S., So that's why we came up with the yarn forward rule of origin on textiles. That's why we had the 55% value rule and upper requirement on footwear. Tough rules that required a lot of components or value among the partners. The administration would like to tighten that up. I don't sense that there's going to be any focus on apparel, footwear, and consumer goods, but I think on industrial machinery, on products other than automobiles, heavy trucks and buses and things like that, the administration will try to impose or negotiate, I shouldn't say impose, but try to negotiate stricter value rules, stricter rules of origin. So again, what I personally want, I think the agreement is good as is. And I think, again, going back to what the business community has faced over the last year is instability and uncertainty. We need certainty. There's one thing Republicans used to stand for on trade, Democrats too, is we need predictability and certainty. That's when the economy works the best. So I would prefer to, I'm with Canada and Mexico. I'd rather see no changes in the current agreement.
All right. Well, I really appreciate your time today, Ron. Always incredibly insightful.
Great. Thank you so much. Great to be with you.